And then switch. So let's go ahead and switch to share. I want this to be shared. I was also having problems the other day with connection speed, and the video really, I mean, aside from my glitches, didn't look that good. I'm going to do a new share. And I want to make sure that I do the whole desktop. There we go, so everybody can see. Now I'm going to close participants, and I'm going to close a few other things so I can see a little bit better. So what I wanted to start with the other day was show you the difference between projection maps and UV maps. What I started with was a simple plane. We're going to use a planar projection on that, and then compare it to one with a UV map. And you'll notice that on this plane, I've subdivided it considerably and tripled it so that when I distort or deform it, it allows me to do that without too many glitches, without too many perturbations or anything. So at the moment, what I have here is a checkerboard. It's affixed to a simple plane. And at the moment, I'm using a UV map. And where you can see that down here in the bottom where it says T for texture, it says checker, because that's the one that I created for it. If I look at the top view, I can switch to UV texture, and this is what it looks like. So this was a projection, okay, from the Z-axis. And it just looks like the grid that you would see from the back or the front view. And then for the image that we place on it, I can go ahead and I can place the checkerboard texture. And that's what you see on there. And that's what gets affixed to that. Now, the problem that I was having the other day, so let me bring up the surface editor. Let's look at the texture, is that I was trying to do it using the node editor. And that wasn't working. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to, instead of, we're going to go ahead and under material, we're going to make sure that standard is selected instead of the default VSDF. So with standard selected, you click on texture, okay? And under projection, what we've been using during this semester has been planar, cylindrical, spherical, cubic, and front projection. This time we're using UV. And then you have to specify which UV map you're using. Well, I'm using the checker one. That's the one that I created for this. And now I'm also selecting the image. Now, once you use the standard mode in this, it works the way it's supposed to. So now what I can do here is, for example, this is what I did the other day. I'm going to switch back to, from UV texture, I'm going to go back to top view. And I'm going to select, again, just something simple like twist, or you could use bend or whatever. But whoa, 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 I don't want that. Let's go ahead and select twist. There we go, got twist. And as soon as I twist it, you'll notice that it's almost as if you've taken a sheet of paper with a checkerboard printed on it and then spray mounted it to a surface, so that as I distort it and deform it, the checker remains intact. Okay, it doesn't distort. It distorts, but it conforms to the distortion of the the object that we're distorting. Okay, that's what we want. And it's a good idea that you generate your UV map early on, so that as you continue to add geometry and make changes to the object, that map will continue to grow and change with it. Now, what I want to do is I want to show you the difference. I'm going to go back and I'm going to go back to the surface editor. And I'm going to go back to texture again, but instead of UV map, I'm going to go back to what we've been doing before, a planar projection. And I'm going to use the checker, and instead of repeat, I'll reset, reset so that we have one image of that, and then we'll use automatic sizing. So this is what we've been doing in the past. Okay. Now, the problem with that is that if I go back to twist, or even if I don't, let's just use move, and I move this, you'll notice that the texture slips around. So I'm moving it in perspective view, but it doesn't remain fixed. Once you send it over to layout, it will be fixed. That's why early on in the semester, when I started applying texture maps to the surfaces, I preferred to use only simple placeholders and then do the final surfacing and layout. But if you do apply a UV map early on in Modeler, it remains fixed. But now watch when I go ahead and I use something like twist again from here. And I twist it. Notice that as I move that, and I twist and I distort and it deforms, that now the checker no longer is fixed to the surface, that it remains separate from. And you can't twist it or distort it that way in layout. I mean, there are distortion maps that you can use and that sort of thing, but what you would want to do is use a UV map. Okay. So the next thing that I wanted to show you, actually, before I do that, let me go undo this a couple of times. And let's bring this back. Is that to create a UV map, you have your object, and down at the bottom in the right-hand corner, you make sure that you select T for texture. And what you do is you come down here and you select new. Now it gives you the different options. And because I have a planar projection, I can name it. So I named it, instead of just texture, I named it checker. You have to decide here, do you want a planar, cylindrical, spherical, or atlas? So since this is a simple plane, I use planar. You have to determine about which axis it's going to project. It would be along the z-axis. If you used y or x, it wouldn't work. Now, if I had created a plane that was like a floor, flat on the ground, perpendicular to the y-axis, it was the y plane, then maybe I would use the y-axis. But z would be good, and then you just go ahead and click create, and that's it. What I want to show you next, though, is, for example, that cereal box that I created. It's not a cereal box, it's a cracker box, same difference. So let me close that. Let me close the surface editor. Let's leave the numeric requester up. So I'm going to change up here. I need to change from the checkered to the Ritz box. That's what I have here. So again, if you wanted to apply surface to something like this, a simple six-sided box, 6 polys, I could come in here and I could select each individual polygon, okay? And I can make a separate surface out of those just by hitting Q and name the surface and name it, box top, box left side, box right side, front, back, and so on and so forth. But instead, what I want to do, since I have created this is a UV map, again, I want to make sure that it remains fixed. So again, if I use the twist here, from here, and twist it from here, let's go ahead. Oh, not going to let me twist it. Okay, and let's, because I don't have enough geometry. Let's switch, select a point. Let's move the point so you can see T for move. And if I move that point, you'll notice that everything is affixed to it. So it becomes kind of elastic and rubbery, and that's kind of what you want. Okay. Now, how I created that UV map was as follows. Let me deselect. I come back in here, and with texture selected, I come in here and I selected new. But this time, instead of a map type of planar, cylindrical, or spherical, I selected atlas. What Atlas does is it totally unwraps the box, and as if you were to tear the box apart and flatten it out. It will do that the same for head, a body, or any other object that you have created. What you might want to do though for complex surfaces, or when you create complex UV maps, like for a character, if you want the hands to be surfaced different from the legs, different from the shirt, different from, you know, the torso, from the legs, and so on and so forth, you might want to generate parts or different surfaces for each of those. Depending on what you want to do, parts or surfaces, you know, would depend on what kind of surfaces that you need, how similar, how different they were going to be. So once I created that Atlas surface, let me close that, show you what it looks like. I can come back up under here and I can select UV texture. And I don't want, I'm going to select none for the moment. And down at the bottom, what I want to do is I want to select the Ritz box. And this is what it looks like. So let me go ahead and hit. It just simply flattened it out. And here we have our top and our bottom, our left and our right, and our front and our back. And I don't know which one is which, to be perfectly honest. It doesn't tell you that because they aren't adequately labeled. And then what you can do is Dan suggested on Monday is you can export this. We're going to take this screen here and we can export. So we can go, instead of save, we're going to go ahead here and select export, and export it as an EPS file. Then you can open that EPS file inside a 2D editing program of your choice, most likely Photoshop. And then you're going to place the images of the top, bottom, left, right, front, and back in these white rectangular areas. Okay. And that's what I did for that. So now if I go ahead here and I select the Ritz box UV map, you can see how that is placed. Now, I did not build my box based on and proportion it according to the Ritz box, and you can see how the top and the bottom and actually the left and the right a little bit distorted, especially the logo on the top and the bottom are distorted just a little bit. That's because I didn't size the box to fit correctly. But it works very nicely. And so if you wanted to replace it or you wanted to change any aspect of it, you could always go back to your Photoshop file and make revisions and bring it back in, or just simply update the surface and it would map it perfectly. I have a question here in the chat. Hello, Professor. I got backtracked and okay. So, okay, that's Montserrat. That's okay, Montserrat. We're fine. We'll talk to you in a little bit. Okay. So that's unwrapping or using an Atlas type map. The next one that we're going to use is, I'll show you Terran head. So let's show that. We do it for a head. So here's Terran head. It's the image of a head. And under UV texture, I want to come down here and I want to select Terran head so you can see what he looks like. And I don't have an image for him, but this is what it looks like when it's unwrapped. Okay, and you'll notice it's a bit a bit distorted. You can see that we have part of an ear, his right ear over here, and you have part of his ear over here. So it looks kind of funky. But you can see that his eyes are a little bit squished together and his nose is pressed together. And it's all, distorted, but I wanted to show you this because it's a low poly image of him. And again, you're going to export this image as an EPS file, or you're going to do a screen capture of it, and then you're going to open it in Photoshop. What you should be aware of, though, is that anything that lies outside of this grid will not work. So it's inside the grid that you need to be pay attention to. So now what I can do is I can show you, again, if you're going to show you how to make this, you come down to T for texture, and you go, you want to create a new one. So you want a new texture. And because his head, I mean, you can use what you want, but because his head is sort of a cylinder, I chose that. And then you have to specify the axis. And since the y-axis runs through vertically the center of his head and it would wrap around it, that's what I chose, is the y-axis to make that cylindrical map right here. So that's what that looks like. Okay. So the final one to show you that fits really, really nicely, I'll switch and I'm going to use Jack here. Let me go ahead and reset that. So you can see that his face fits really, really nicely on there. So down at the bottom, I don't have a one selected, but I'm going to select this one. And this is what, you know, once you've tripled the object and it's no longer subpatches or anything, and you want it to be mapped, this is the complex map that this looks like. It's just a bunch of triangles, you know, 3-point polys. So it looks pretty nasty. And then if I go ahead and I select an image for that underneath, you can see that I can select, it is, which one is it? Because there's a bunch of these. I think it's this one. There we go. So let me go ahead and turn off. I'm just going to look at this from no, I want the top view. No, I do need to use a UV texture. There we go. So let's highlight this. Can't see it that well. It's really stretched out. Again, you have to in Photoshop use Puppet Warp, or you have to use the Liquify tool, or a combination of tools to stretch your image to fit so that the eyes match these areas here, and the nose and the mouth, and then the ears are stretched way out to the side, so that once it's wrapped onto the head, it fits in here really nicely. And you can see the seam along the back of his head if you look really carefully here. The ears in the back of his head and everything are pretty simplified, but if you look, he has, you know, the beard stubble, and that there are separate images and layers that are used for his eyes and his mouth and that sort of thing. Okay. So those are UV maps. If you happen to have a 3D scanner, most 3D scanners will automatically create a UV map, and they will also automatically create a texture that goes on top of that. If you have that to start, that's really a huge bonus, because then you can take the image that they use for the map and you can bring that into Photoshop and you can refine it and docker it and perfect it. It's a little bit easier than what we are doing right now. Okay, so that's, if there are any questions, I wanted to move on to the YouTube videos and cover fiber effects and the different things that you can do with that. Typically, people think of fiber effects as being used for hair or fur, but they can also be used for scales and feathers. They can also be used to create leaves on branches, and if you wanted to create grass, or if you wanted to create kind of a weird fluffy kind of carpet, there's all things that they can be used for. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to pause the recording.